Good afternoon. I would like to start with a question to the audience. My question is there anyone among you who has not entered for a single moment today, even for a short period of time, into the digital domain? Used the internet, sent an email, browsed something, entered the Facebook. Is there anyone who has not done that? Just one person. Yes. You are welcome to stay here, but the presentation is actually topical, I think, for then all the rest who are here. The idea of the formula, the internet balancing formula, for the first time was introduced last summer at the European Commission. The idea, not the formula itself. Then it was subsequently the idea was used here at Tallinn University in the conference Europe after Delphi. And then the formula, was introduced during several lectures last year and this year in different universities in Europe, in South America, and also in Australia to different academic audiences. The formula, including the theoretical foundations, will be published in 2019. It will be published in several places. It will be published in the Routledge Handbook on the Digital Society and Human Rights. It will also appear at the beginning of next year in the special edition on Internet of the European Law Journal. The European Law Journal will include an article by Professor Alexy where he critically reviews the balancing formula. And it is my privilege also to include into that special edition of European Law Journal my reply to Professor Alexy's critique. So what we are seeing here, an international debate initiating between Professor Alexy and myself regarding the possibilities of balancing in the digital domain. As for the introduction, we know that balancing is a dominant discursive practice, which means that the stakeholders, these would be the internet companies, different online platforms, they use the balancing approach when they have conflicting fundamental rights at stake. International courts are applying it, and also the legislature on the international and European level are applying the balancing instrument. Academics are divided whether it is justified or not to apply balancing in the digital space. But of course, one can say that the discursive practice, the fact that balancing as such is implied or applied, doesn't mean that it is justifiable from wanting and epistemic perspectives, because the objections against balancing online are the same as are used on the offline world. These would be the absence of morality and the aspect of arbitrariness. These are well-known objections to balancing in general. Now, when I speak about the epistemic aspect, it is related to how the information is obtained about conflicting interests, how it is evaluated, and how the outcome is implemented. We know how the judges do it, or at least we think how they do it. We are not certain how in the online domain it is done. At the moment, there are two principal positions regarding balancing on the internet sphere. The first position claims that the private online companies should never be given the task to assess online content. In other words, Facebook should not say whether something should be deleted, Google should not say whether something should be blocked. Just a few examples. Frank LaRue, the former special rapporteur of the United Nations on the freedom of expression, has issued a very strong statement that the states should never force internet intermediaries to undertake censorship on their behalf. Now, whether censorship is the same as assessing content online is a different matter, but in fact it is evaluation of online information. Also, the new Council of Europe recommendation includes the aspect that the states should not be required to impose censorship obligations on private companies. The reasons for such position are manifold. It would be political, because then there could be private influence of political opinions. It can be costly for online companies to hire people who do the content assessment. It can be constitutional. You can say that private companies lack constitutional legitimacy to assess conflicting fundamental rights online. But in fact, I do not believe that all of these objections amount to the rejection of the possibility of online content assessment, because if we understand balancing, it is the optimization requirement which requires that something would be realized to the greatest possible extent, given the factual and legal possibilities. That is now the theory of Robert Alexy, and we can say that private balancing of conflicting interests online is such legal and factual possibility. Now, the second position, which is dominant in today's world, says that the internet intermediaries are best positioned to balance conflicting rights online. For example, we have the Delphi judgment, the Google judgment, the new general data protection regulation. All of these indicate that private companies are so close and the conflicting interests appear on their platforms, so they are positioned to balance. Now, the epistemic aspect then is related to how information is gathered and how it is assessed. Here are two issues. One of them is matter of time. When we speak about judicial balancing, the judges have, or the courts have, as much time as they want to gather information, to use different arguments. Online, we do not have such luxury, because we know that whenever information which is doubtful, illegal, violating somebody's rights is not deleted or blocked immediately, it can stay online forever, because it can spread around the world to millions and millions of people. So the matter of time, the time is very short. I do not know if you have seen, there is a documentary called what is a documentary? I think it is a documentary, I don't remember the name, but it depicts how Google administrators are assessing online. You have hundreds of people sitting behind big screens, and they do not have minutes. They have about 5 to 10 seconds to decide whether content is illegal or whether it is violating somebody's rights. Now, the second aspect is related to the fact that if there is such a little time to assess conflicting information online, perhaps rational balancing is not possible at all. Here, the formula which I'm going to propose may lead to a rational outcome. The second aspect of online balancing is related to arbitrariness. We know what Habermas has indicated about balancing, that there are no rational standards. We know Alexy's response to that mathematical formula applies that. But of course, internet-specific is that whenever an online portal issues a decision or takes a decision, whether to block something or take something down, these decisions are not reasons. We do not see Google issuing a decision why it blocked something, or Facebook telling why it took some information down. So as for the online balancing, the questions are, who are the decision makers, which are the standards, which is the argumentation. We could call it also the issue of capabilities, whether online intermediaries are capable of balancing at all. Currently, what they are doing, they are only issuing statistics and certain general standards. They are not issuing individualized decisions. And here again, the formula which you are going to see in a minute may become a tool to overcome the objection of the lack of transparency and can claim correctness. Now, the only question. We know from the instruments issued by different international organs and also by academics that the rights online and offline are the same. It has been issued by different, or this opinion has been voiced by several organs, also including the United Nations. But the idea that rights online are the same as offline, for example, that the freedom of expression and right to privacy deserve equal protection, it is being challenged from both sides. Some say that the freedom of expression deserves more interest. Some say that privacy deserves more interest. And I will now introduce also quickly one of the ideas behind the Internet balancing formula, which is the idea of Internet vulnerability. It is a growing theoretical thought or trend, which is to say that it is an ontic condition for anyone who enters the digital domain because of the unproportionality of the relationship. An individual facing big internet companies is always in a weaker position. Now I will, after these very quick considerations, I will go to introduce some of the assumptions of the Internet balancing formula. First of all, it is to be a living instrument with sufficient degree of flexibility to respond to future changes. Secondly, it is to be a mathematical formula which should not enable blocking of information, which may be vital for the nation's well-being. It is certainly inspired by Robert Alexy's weight formula. Its input elements are based on the criteria used primarily by the European Court of Human Rights. It should be a simple formula which can be applied both by anyone who doesn't have professional training, and it is a quotient value of two fundamental rights. Numerical value assigned to privacy divided by the numerical value assigned to the freedom of expression. I am using numerical values 1 to 3 based on the significance of input elements. 1 would be light interference, 2 would be moderate interference, and 3 would be intense interference. And of course, we know that since hate speech is considered, and justifiably so, illegal in all jurisdictions, the Internet balancing formula can come to play only once it is established that the situation does not occur or does not include the matter of hate speech. Now, from the side of the right to privacy, the first element would be the Internet vulnerability, which has been assigned the constant numerical value of 1. The second element would be the element of interference into privacy, whether it is light, whether it is moderate, and whether it is intense. It is identified by Pierre and the intensity by small letter x. So far, the side of the right to privacy is V, as you see, it is Internet vulnerability with constant 1, then plus PR, the possible scales from 1 to 3. The third element would be that of time. The assumption would be that with the passage of time, the interference into privacy will diminish. It is difficult to argue against that. Of course, it is a matter of degree, and I have assigned to that the intensity levels from 0 to 1 with a small letter y, and a bit perhaps arbitrarily divided when certain elements would come into play, dividing it from 0 years to 13 years when the information which is debatable has been published more than 13 years ago. Then the right to privacy has also the element of 1 for the time. So far, the right to privacy side is this, as you can see. Now, the freedom of expression. The first element there would be the public interest in the subject matter, which is not a subjective, but would be an objective criterion, and identified by PA with the levels of 3 levels of X. Minor public interest 1, medium public interest 2, and significant public interest 3. Because of the absence of or lack of time, I will not elaborate too much how you or what would be the exact possibilities to assign those levels. Now, is that rational? I would say that it is rational because even if we accept that there is an error being made by the one who is evaluating this, the error would become repetitive. Now, the second element would be the matter if the freedom of expression violation concerns somebody who is a public figure. Again, we would use the scale of 0 to 3. 3 person holding significant public power, 2 person who has voluntarily entered the public domain, and 1 person who is only voluntarily in the public domain. And so far, the side of the freedom of expression is this: PI plus PF. The third element, it now originates from the Strasbourg jurisprudence, would be how information was obtained. Here I would use a smaller scale, 0 to 0.75, with a negative, the negative sign. If it is obtained illegally, it would be minus 0.75 and so on. Of course, it is questionable what is morally questionable and what is morally wrong. It may change over time. So far, the side of the freedom of expression is this. Now, the final aspect here comes from the fact that we know for certain that online conflicting information is not often evaluated by humans. It is evaluated by artificial intelligence. In principle, all of the aspects before can be evaluated by artificial intelligence. Now, how to assure that morality is present in online content assessment? My proposal would be to introduce the element or the aspect of empathy. Empathy means that so far as artificial intelligence is not capable of moral judgments, it has to be a human being who evaluates that. So it would be identified by E with a maximum weight combination for both sides being 1. And it is not compulsory, but would be applied when the quotient is 1, meaning which would be the stalemate cases, or if the situation itself calls for application. So here is the internet balancing formula, now for the first time introduced in Estonia. As you can see, here are the elements based on all of the previous aspects. I will switch on immediately because I would like to enter into discussion with Robert Alexy's critique. The second, the final aspect of this internet balancing formula is the interest in historic truth. My assumption has been that the application of the formula should never lead to the blocking of historical truth. So if it can be shown that the matter concerns historic truth, the information has to be accessible regardless what the internet balancing formula suggests. I have, in some lectures abroad, I have given the example that when those who do not know Estonian history, when there was a coup in Moscow before the Soviet Union collapsed, it was believed that a person was supposed to become the new head of Estonian Soviet Socialist Republic had the coup succeeded. Who that person is not known. Now the question is, Jaak knows, but we will not ask him. Now, should it be the situation that the publication of the person's name on internet or the internet balancing formula should demonstrate that you cannot publish that information, but since it concerns historic truth, then the internet balancing formula should not be used. I have also used several slides to test the formula, but I will not elaborate on that for a long time. Just the Delphi case, the internet balancing formula would have provided the same result. Now I will get to Robert Alexy's critique. In his article, Professor Alexy has mentioned the following, quite correctly, that the weight formula developed by Professor Alexy is abstract and general, whereas the internet balancing formula is concrete and practical. I will show just some of the main aspects of his critique and will offer a reply. His first point of critique is related to the matter of we. You remember, I indicated that it was supposed to be the issue of internet vulnerability as a constant. Alexy is asking the question whether it is the element of intensity or whether it concerns the abstract weight of privacy. Alexy's second point of critique is a so-called concretization thesis, which means that all the elements of the internet balancing formula which you saw before are located at the level below the weight formula. And he calls the element of empathy as the weakest element of the internet balancing formula. Now, regarding the aspect of internet vulnerability, this is what Professor Alexy writes. He writes that abstract weight can be attributed only to right to privacy as such. If it were to be attributed to privacy under certain conditions, like communication in the internet, it would no longer concern an abstract weight. Rather, it would concern the weight under certain conditions. So Alexy proposes that the internet vulnerability actually should be considered the element of intensity of interference. My replies would be the following. I think what we are talking about here is whether at any given time there can exist more than one abstract weight of a fundamental right. In the other words, if we deter, or is it so that the element of the right to privacy at this given time has certain abstract weight in all conditions, in all situations? Or whether we can say that the right to privacy can have different abstract weights. Alexy believes that it can only have one, as far as I can understand, it can only have one abstract weight. I would argue that it can have more than one abstract weight at any given time. There are three reasons for that. The first reason is, what is the source of abstract weight? Does it originate from the ideal dimension of law, which may be something which Alexy proposes, or does it originate from the discursive practice? And I have indicated before that both academics and also some court organs, some of them say that right to privacy in internet deserves more protection. Some say that freedom of expression deserves more protection. So we can say that the discursive practice here is contradicting the ideal dimension. Then my second objection would be about the interrelation between abstract weight and intensity. If we see that in all situations, certain or intrusion into the privacy is on certain level of intensity, I'm questioning whether it doesn't transform into the abstract weight. My third objection is concerning the human rights development. We know from the research that currently the question is whether the circle of new human rights is limited or whether new human rights can appear. And I believe we have been able to, or we are going to demonstrate in one of the books, that new human rights are being derived from or implied from existing new human or existing human rights. What does it mean? For example, there are claims that the right to bodily integrity or the right to not know one's genetic heritage may deserve or may deserve a separate status as a human right. Currently, they are not recognized as separate human rights, although you cannot deny that the right to bodily integrity is part of the privacy at the current moment. But the arguments concerning the right to bodily integrity are of absolute nature. They say that the right to bodily integrity cannot be infringed in any or under any circumstances. So if that is the case, we could see that the right to privacy includes certain sub-rights which may deserve different abstract weight. Now, I have decided, thanks to Professor Alexy's criticism, to review the internet balancing formula. And this is the first place I'm introducing it. It's based on the understanding that the abstract weight of freedom of expression or privacy may not be the same. So what you can see I have done here, I have introduced the element of intensity, of privacy or expression violation, retained on the upper part all the elements, taking down internet vulnerability. On the bottom, I've retained all the elements of intrusion into freedom of expression, and then included the abstract weights of privacy and expression. And at the moment, I would then propose that the abstract weight would stand for 2 if it can be shown it is an absolute. It needs to be an absolute right. Maybe the right not to know one's genetic heritage. Maybe the right to the integrity of the body, who deserves that. And in other situations, it would be 1 to 0. So whichever right deserves more protection, then would be given 1 and the other would be given 0. And of course, one would need to say that this now is about the practice dependence of human rights, because who is then to say what the concrete abstract weight in a certain platform is? It may lead to a situation when one platform has assigned one abstract weight and the other. Now, the second criticism of Professor Alexy is that of the concretization thesis. That is the expression he uses. He says that the input elements of the internet balancing formula are below the elements of the weight formula. That is correct. Yes, it cannot be objected. But I would say that the concretization thesis accomplishes what the argumentation thesis accomplishes in the weight formula. Namely, it justifies the classification of input elements, minimizes arbitrariness concern, and increases the claim to correctness. Because, once again, in the weight formula, all the input elements are subject to argumentation. In online world, argumentation cannot be used. So concretization is needed to increase the trust in the transparency of the outcome. Now, the element of empathy, that was the third objection of Robert Alexy. That is what Professor Alexy writes. He objects to my idea that empathy includes or introduces the element of morality into the balancing formula, because he writes that rational argumentation and moral evaluation are not to be set in contraposition. My reply to that would be that indeed it is so, but the aspects of rational argumentation and moral evaluation are not synonyms. Moral evaluation does not presuppose justification via arguments. It is something which seems to be right. And I would propose here that this element of empathy leads to the irrationality thesis. It retains a human involvement in conflicting rights assessment online, and it could be used in stalemate cases and in difficult cases. That is all that can be said at this time about Professor Alexy's critique of the internet balancing formula. And then, if it were to be applied, I think it could influence the discursive practice of balancing in the internet. It could raise confidence in private online balancing as a rational instrument, and it could decrease objections of lack of transparency and arbitrariness. Thank you, and I hope the debate will continue.